Good evening. Tonight, the Planning Commission meeting for Tuesday, June 6th, 2023 is hereby called to order. So our first item on the agenda is public comments. Do we have, we have someone for public? If you have public comments on we do have one. Okay. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's meeting. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the Planning Commission is to listen. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our virtual guests. If you are present, please sign in. If you are online, please use the raise hand feature now if you wish to speak. All guests must address the comments to the chair and to the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we can confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time. Any comments regarding the issue being heard tonight in public hearing, and that is the climate action element and the utilities element, must wait till the public hearing. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Screen sharing is not allowed. You can submit materials to Planning Commission or clerk in advance. Materials submitted after the meeting will be provided to the commission and will be part of the record. This meeting is being recorded. We appreciate that you are taking the time to express your perspective. Madam Clerk.
We have no one in the audience, but we have Dakota Rash online. And Dakota, you're free to talk.
Thank you all. I did want to clarify my comment is very much on the utilities section. Is that acceptable at this time?
It would be best that it would be doing public hearing. However, I'm getting a wave down from my staff.
The public hearing is specifically about the climate action element only. So he's welcome to speak.
The utilities thing down at the bottom was just a note. Okay. You are welcome to speak to the utilities element and we'll restart your time.
Thank you all. I very much appreciate it. And thank you for the opportunity to speak. Good afternoon or good evening. My name is Dakota Rash and I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park. The climate crisis is very much here and it is already impacting our daily lives. I today have already counted how far behind we are on average rainfall, and I'm nervous about the loss and smoke this summer is sure to bring. Kenmore has done a lot to plan for climate change, but it is still kept captive in the fossil fuel era by Puget Sound Energy. Their promises of clean, green energy are nothing more than a shell game. Its green power program only shuffles its minuscule renewable energy around to the highest bidder. Voluntary renewable energy credits do nothing to actually impact investment or generation of additional clean energy. Even Google, environmental hero that it is, has recognized that RECs are pointless and that we need to be doing all we can to actually generate new renewable energy. And concerning in this, PSE's integrated resources plans reveal that this company actually plans to invest more money into and expand their fossil fuel use. Not only that, but they actually project that if the Clean Energy Transformation Act were gone in some horrible reality, they would add no renewable resources to their portfolio. And in fact, graphs show, because they have to analyze these things for their investors, that their CO2 emissions, in again, that horrible hypothetical reality that the Clean Energy Transformation Act were gone, their CO2 emissions will go right back up. As a sick twist of the knife in these reports, PSE acknowledges that it could have been 100% clean fuel sourced today. Its neighbors, your neighbors, certainly prove that entirely clean electricity can come to this geographical area. I have some qualms about the ecological impacts of hydro, but it proves that that power can come here. The problem is that PSE just wouldn't make as much money. So our futures, our health, our enjoyable planet are not worth this company's profits. It could have already fixed its problem, but those things just aren't worth the money to them. Please keep your eyes and ears open as you interact with this greenwashing fossil fuel corporation that has spent millions of dollars to try and convince cities and companies and other public entities that it's doing its best. Use your voices, vested with the authority and responsibility of your positions, to tell them to put people over profits and to stop their crusade to trade our future on this planet for short-term monetary gain. Thank you, and I look forward to hearing the conversation about the climate element tonight.
Thank you very much for your comments. Is there anyone else?
There is another person online. If you're interested in speaking, could you please raise your hand? It looks like we're good.
We're good, okay. That's the closing of our public comments. The next item on the agenda is the Planning Commission minutes for May 16th, 2023. Is there any discussion or objection to these minutes? Hearing none, they will be entered into the minutes as unanimously approved. Ladies and gentlemen, we're just waiting for our staff to get to the table.
Good evening, Planning Commission. So before the commission opens the public hearing, staff have a PowerPoint presentation to kind of give an overview of the purpose of the hearing tonight. So that being said, I will turn it over to Richard, Nina. Turn it over to Nina. Thank you, Nina.
Nicole will be starting us off in this presentation.
Hello, Nicole.
Hello.
There you are. You're off mute. We see your some words come out with your lips.
Great.
That's great. All right, you were ready to go.
Great. Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Gutierrez. I'm an associate with Cascadia Consulting, and I'll be kicking off the presentation today on the climate action element. The presentation will focus on a couple of things listed here. We'll first go over the project timeline, answer the question, why a climate action element, why now? Walk through the climate action element development process, review the climate action element goals, objectives, and policies at a very high level overview, and touch on implementation considerations and the city's next steps. The project timeline showed here notes major project milestones that were achieved throughout the climate action development process. So I'll go over the development process in more detail in the upcoming slides, but just wanted to note a few things here. So the project kicked off in January of this year. Cascadia Consulting and Kenmore staff met to review project goals and outcomes. In February and March, the Gaps, Trends, and Opportunities Assessment Memo, or policy audit, was drafted and used to identify existing Kenmore policies related to climate that could be incorporated into the climate action element, and identified where additional policies would need to be developed to fill policy gaps that were identified. We conducted staff interviews to refine draft policies in this memo. And in April, we completed the first draft of the climate action element, and this underwent an equity assessment to ensure policies considered maximizing co-benefits and distributing those equitably, and did not result in unintended consequences for overburdened communities. The climate action element was further edited and refined with the Planning Commission at 3 meetings throughout April and May, And feedback was also solicited at these times for two weeks in total during public comment periods. The revised climate action element is what was shared tonight, and we're looking forward to hearing from the public and any additional feedback and incorporating that into the final draft of the climate action element. So answering the question, why develop a climate action element? Why now? There's a few key things we wanted to mention here. So first, the Growth Management Act was amended in 2023, earlier this year, under Washington House Bill 1181. This required cities and counties to integrate climate mitigation and resiliency policies into comprehensive plan updates. So this legislation ensures that comprehensive plans adapt to and mitigate the effects of a changing climate, support reductions in greenhouse gas emissions, and reduction in per capita vehicle miles traveled, prepare for climate impact scenarios, foster resiliency to climate impacts and natural hazards, and protect and enhance environmental, economic, and human health and safety, as well as advance environmental justice. So that was one reason for why now. And the second wanted to mention here is that it was identified as a priority in the city's climate action plan, which was adopted in May of 2022. So here is action TL 2.2 in the climate action plan, which says develop a climate action plan element to integrate with the comprehensive plan update. So this was already identified by the city as a priority to complete. And now I'll briefly go over the climate action element development process. So we've bucketed this into 5 main steps that I'll go over right now. Step 1 was to identify broad policy goals and targets related to mitigation and resilience under, and what that means for mitigation is we referenced the greenhouse gas reduction targets and modeling results from Kenmore's 2019 greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And under resilience, developing policies and goals and developing that baseline was to explore Kenmore's climate risks and impacts through the city's 2021 vulnerability assessment, use and refer to regional climate reports and projections, and other adaptation tools. The second step was to conduct a policy audit of Kenmore's comprehensive plan and other policies to assess how well they currently build climate resilience and reduce emissions, and identify climate resilience, mitigation, and climate equity policy opportunities, gaps, and trends to include in the draft climate action element. Step 3, use that policy audit as a baseline to draft goals and policies developed for the climate action element. So we strengthened or used existing policies, and gaps identified in the audit were addressed using the Department of Commerce's menu of measures, which is a database of over 200 policies for jurisdictions to pull from for a climate element. And these policies were tailored to Kenmore specifically when necessary. We also developed new goals and policies based on state guidelines, community needs, and city priorities. In step 4, we solicited feedback to vet and refine the draft goals and policies, and this was done through city staff interviews, public comment periods, and presenting to the Planning Commission. The feedback received was used to revise, strengthen, add goals and objectives and policies that would better reflect city priorities and community concerns. Cascadia also conducted an equity assessment, which examined the impacts, both intended and not, on people in overburdened communities, and identified policies that needed further equity considerations, as well as provided recommendations that should be considered in a revision of the draft, in which was incorporated as well. Step 5 is the final step, and it's still ongoing, and that will be to integrate mitigation and resilience goals and policies into Kenmore's comprehensive plan. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Nina, who will go over the actual climate action element draft.
Thank you, Nicole. Very briefly, I'm just going to review the goals, objectives, and policies of this climate action element. Starting off with the purpose, we've talked about this a little bit, but this element is intended to address the impacts of climate change and introduce strategies to build resilience in our community. It builds on commitments that have been previously identified in Kenmore's CAP. Further, it provides an actionable framework to guide the implementation of mitigation and resilience actions on a long-term scale. And then lastly, it identifies opportunities that serve as the foundation for an ongoing community engagement, education, and dialogue around climate action. So the document is structured similar to other elements as part of the comprehensive plan. We have an introduction that goes over what I just covered there, guiding plans and policies from local and regional plans, such as our CAP, the Growth Management Act, and other various policies to adhere to. Existing conditions, these are assessments that staff have conducted, including the greenhouse gas emissions inventory, our vulnerability assessment, and then future climate risks so that we can make sure we appropriately address those concerns. The document also lists out several goals, objectives, and policies throughout the document, going into substantial detail in different subcategories to ensure that all of those areas are specifically addressed. And then lastly, there is an implementation section that is provided as, again, that roadmap to, or that framework rather, to implement these actions and move us forward. So there are several focus areas that are addressed in this draft, and they fall into two categories, mitigation being the first one, which is how we can reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And that includes several topic areas such as reducing vehicle miles traveled, implementing transit-oriented development, increasing our energy efficiency, as well as renewable energy production and use, and then promoting carbon sequestration as well. On the resilience side, which is how our community would adapt and respond to climate change impacts, we address focus areas such as environmental justice and air quality, preparing our communities through infrastructure, making sure that is resilient to extreme weather and natural disasters, protecting and restoring our ecosystems, and then increasing our outreach and engagement in climate, particularly in those communities who are most vulnerable to those impacts. The implementation section is our last section in the draft, and that falls largely into two categories, monitoring and evaluation being the first. This is where we will be looking at our progress. We will also be using the element and the CAP to help guide this, with the CAP providing a little more of a roadmap to do that. And we'll be using these documents in order to provide a timeline, prioritization, and budget to move this work forward. The plan developments and updates is the second section in implementation, and that is also informed by the CAP, noting that the CAP is updated on a 5-year cycle, but also notes that we will be using strategies such as incentives for the public and businesses, engagement and partnerships through local organizations and regional authorities. This also means that we'll be coordinating across city departments to ensure that there is we are incorporating climate considerations in all of our operations and projects. The next steps for the climate action element specifically include the recommendation. Once we have refined the element based on public comment, we are also receiving feedback from the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Accessibility Task Force. And we have taken into account Planning Commission feedback to come up with an additional draft. This will then lead into the element adoption, where the element will be presented to City Council coming this fall and will lead to an ordinance adoption. And with that, I will open it up to any clarifying questions. And if there are none, then I would open it up to public comment.
I see no questions from the dais. Thank you very much. I appreciate the briefing, Nicole. Great, so we're ready to go. We welcome our community members to the Planning Commission's public hearing. In this forum, the Planning Commission does not engage or dialogue with the public. The primary role of the commission is to listen. Tonight, the public hearing is on the climate action element of the comprehensive plan. Please see the agenda packet for details. It does include an entire draft of the element which the Planning Commission has worked on up until now. We will hear from our on-site guests first, followed by our virtual guests. If you are here in the chambers, please be sure to sign in. If you are online, please use the raise hand feature right now if you wish to speak. All guests must address the comments to the chair and the city planning commissioners. The clerk will acknowledge your request and call your name when it is your turn. Your time will start when we confirm that we can hear you. Due to time constraints and to provide fair time to all community members, we must limit each speaker to 3 minutes. We will not split your time with others or reset your time. Please state your name and city of residence for the record. Screen sharing is not allowed. You may submit materials to the Planning Commission or clerk in advance. This meeting is being recorded. We appreciate you taking the time to express your opinions and comments. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone online?
We do. Dakota Rash is online for a comment. Go ahead, Dakota.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can, thank you.
Thank you. I switched media. And I guess I get 2 bites at the apple tonight. Wonderful to talk to you all again. Thank you so much for the time. My name is Dakota Rash. I'm a resident of Lake Forest Park. I'll just kind of share my big thoughts. Overall, I'm really happy with a lot of elements that are in this plan. I think Ken Moore is doing a lot of really great forward thinking. I'm even seeing language in there about connection of green spaces, which I think is a kind of next step that a lot of municipalities and government agencies don't necessarily take quite yet. So I think that's really great. I submitted quite a detailed list for the public, for the kind of interactive space on the website. So I won't go into all of those. I have 4 kind of big concerns and things I'd love for you all to ponder on. The first is that, and I will say this at every opportunity I get, a 50% greenhouse gas reduction goal by 2030 is not fast enough. Net zero by 2050 is a global goal, and it is the responsibility of developed nations and states and cities to reach that goal faster. And so 50 by 2030 with net zero by 2050 is too little too late. I overall am not a fan of all the reduce language throughout this element. I would love to see eliminate, because reduce is inherent in eliminate, and we have to be bold and honest that our goal is elimination of greenhouse gas emissions. Next, I don't feel as much of a presence of a priority to create new ecosystem resiliency in this. I see a lot of protect as is, preserve what exists, but not necessarily a lot of prioritize ecological uses of property when acquired when it is ecologically significant. I think there are several opportunities within city limits, like the property that has long been fantasized to turn into Lake Point. And I think that could be really ecologically beneficial. And that's going to be a huge part of how we mitigate impacts from climate crisis, is how much space we give back to nature to let it actively heal itself, because it does such a better job than we do. And next, this one's a little nitpicky. In goal 15, I would really love to see the removal of continued growth of a green economy. A lust for endless capital growth on a finite planet is what got us into this mess. And reading that section, I feel the goal really is more of a transition to a different green circular economy, which is great, you know, presenting reuse and recycling and less use. That's what we need to be doing to make sure that we have enough for everyone, because we definitely do. It just goes to waste right now. So yeah, those are kind of my big thoughts that I hope you all can hear and consider as you're looking at all the more detailed elements of this section. Again, thank you all for the time, especially twice. I appreciate you all's endurance tonight.
Thank you very much for your comments. We appreciate that. Do we have anyone else?
That's all.
All right. Public hearing is closed. So our next item will be the utilities element discussion. I'm a little slightly confused on my agenda, Debbie.
So you have the opportunity this evening. You have a revised draft that was in the packet, which you had the public hearing on. If you have any comments this evening that you would like staff to address, this would be a good time. The intent is to come back at your next meeting on the 20th, and that will include sort of a summary of public comment heard. So if there's anything this evening based on the revised draft, please let us know tonight. Otherwise, if there are no substantive comments tonight, we would be looking for direction on the 20th.
Okay. We do have some blue and red items on this draft, or is that already done? Because when I noticed that.
So there was a clean version in the packet as well as an edited version.
Oh,
so we
okay,
put the clean version in there so it would be easy for the public to see what the current version is. The edited version was based on Planning Commission comments at the last meeting and also some additional staff edits. So if you can look at either copy that was in the packet. And again, if you have any comments, let us know.
Well, I would propose that we look at any additional staff edits that you would like us to, that you interpreted our desires and policy. So if you'd like to point any of those out that we should just take a brief, quick look at.
Well, I can pass it to Nina as well, but I do not believe that we had any major substantive changes in this draft. Most of them were relatively minor. The implementation section, which I think Nina made a comment on in the memo, looks a bit different, but it's the same content, but we kind of just moved it to more of a bulleted list to match the formatting and the rest of the plan, but all of the information, including any edits that were discussed, are included in that bulleted list. And then the only other more major change was the recognizing, I think we just recognized tribal organizations in the region rather than trying to create a specific list. So that was one direction you wanted to come back with, kind of just a more encompassing one. So Those were the two that I can think of. Were there any others, Nina, to call to their attention?
Could you point out where the tribal item is? What line, page and line number?
Give me just 1 second here.
Now, and what version would it be best to point to?
The one that we have tonight.
Okay. The blue red line edit version.
Yes.
This is under plan development and updates. It is the first bullet and the third sub-bullet.
Could you please?
I'm sorry.
The page and line
Yes.
number.
This would be page. Oops. Sorry, the pages are not on here.
Oh, I can jump in. It's page 22, line 7 and 8. We
Go ahead.
Sorry. And
Go ahead.
just wanted to also point out, we also note maintaining tribal treaty rights on the same page, line 13 and 14.
Okay, thank you very much. And then there was that item, and what was the other item that you mentioned? The tribal, you had just said there were
What was the
two.
implementation?
It was just that and then the overhaul of the implementation section. I
the-
don't believe there were any
Oh,
other.
The
Yeah, right.
formatting of the
Mhm.
The
implementation
formatting,
section, so.
that's-
Right. The majority of, I believe these other blue line edits throughout the body were existing prior to last meeting. So any additional changes were just the red line edits that were done during the meeting time.
Which we actually already approved. Is there any further comments or questions from the commissioners? Commissioner Banazinski.
What is our mechanism for addressing comments from the public hearing and potentially incorporating those into the draft element?
So typically we hear the public comments and then there is a staff response, and the staff response will either point to where it currently is in the document or will make suggested edits.
And that will come to us next meeting.
Correct. So again, you will see that, and then commission can discuss that if there are any recommendations to make additional edits. If there are, those can be, I don't know if we'll be doing that ahead of time or after.
Well, we can do it during the meeting, get it done.
Right.
Yeah,
I
we
mean,
can-
in terms of a revised draft.
Yeah, we can either try and address those in the meeting, or, you know, if the commission still wants to continue working on it, then we'll keep working on it.
I can probably speak for the rest of the commissioners that we would like to finish this next meeting. Is that fair? Oh, everyone's nodding up and down, so that's a good sign. Okay, go ahead, Commissioner Banazinski.
So I will just put in that I appreciated Dakota's comments tonight, and so I will look forward to hearing staff response to those, and I would love to be able to incorporate some of those actually into the draft element.
Any further comments? Right. So this item will be held over, not the public hearing, but the item will be held over to the next meeting. Ready for any staff input or comments that you feel is appropriate before we act on this in final form to send it to the council. So the intention is to send it to the council next meeting.
Yes.
Yes. Right. So now that brings us to, am I correct, to the utilities element?
That is correct. I would like to invite Patrick Robinson, who's the Municipal Liaison Manager with PSE, to step up to the staff table. Patrick has answered many of your questions previously, and you had some additional questions. So the reason for this tonight is so that Patrick can give you some information about PSE that will be helpful as you develop or refine the public utilities element. So that's why PSE is a component of that, and we'll then use the information from tonight to further refine and develop draft goals, objectives, and policies. You have not seen those yet. So you had a meeting in February where we provided the background information to the utilities element, and that seems a long time ago now. You then had some questions, and Patrick very kindly responded to those questions, and you looked at those in April and had some additional questions. So again, before staff starts to draft the goals, objectives, and policies, just wanted to make sure that you had the opportunity to ask Patrick questions, and he can give you a little bit more about PSC's goals for transition to non-fossil fuel, looking a little bit about how PSC operates in terms of the framework they operate in, and how that interaction goes with the city. So there's no real action from this evening. This is an opportunity for questions that we'll then use to develop the element. So I was stalling for time here so we could get that up. So I'll now turn that over to Patrick, and he can introduce himself and go through the presentation. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you very much for coming, Patrick. We appreciate it.
Certainly. I appreciate you having me. Like Debbie was saying, happy to answer questions. I've got a couple slides here just to sort of give you an introduction to PSC at large as a company and how we're operating. And then a couple slides to kind of dive into the questions, the follow-up questions you had sent. So to get started, this is a lot here. It's not super important to tonight's conversation, but there's a lot of folks who are involved with regulating PSE. I threw this slide together so that you guys could have it if I'm talking about things that maybe are not familiar. But so in terms of who's regulating PSE, you'll see FERC and NERC both up there. Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is at the federal level. They're looking at safety, they're looking at reliability. They're setting a lot of the standards for us. The sort of maintenance and generally how we're, in FERC's case, interconnecting with the electric system outside of our service territory. PHMSA is also national. And then so the WUTC is going to be the state regulator. And so PSE is an investor-owned utility. It has a defined service territory that's defined by the state. And so we have the state kind of set guidelines for how we provide that service. Electric utilities don't have competition in the same way that, say, telecoms do. And so we have to make sure that that service is being provided in a fair manner. The UTC sets rates for our customers. They decide what our return on investments are going to be. They're looking at our safety programs, generally what our reliability is. And so they get a report from us. It was referenced earlier, the integrated resource plan. It's sort of PSC's broad planning for how we're going to be serving our customers on a long range scale. And historically, they've sort of decided what is appropriate for PSC to be investing in. That was sort of framed in the context of reliability, safety, and cost. More recently, with the passage of Clean Energy Transformation Act and the Climate Commitment Act, which is kind of down below, the UTC is thinking a little bit more about carbon and equity. And so we've got this new framework for sort of planning our long range energy generation. Threw up a couple codes, mostly to show that we're dealing with both federal and state level laws there. And then I just referenced CETA as a state regulation, the Clean Energy Transformation Act. PSC is doing a lot of work to meet those thresholds, and we'll continue to be working to make sure that we're meeting those benchmarks. So 2025, eliminating coal from our generation portfolio, 2030, reaching greenhouse gas neutrality, and then in 2040, 100% renewable, non-emitting electric energy. So it's a pretty big undertaking for PSC. We've got a lot going on in terms of new generation, making sure that our facilities are going to be able to bring that energy into the system at large. Western Washington is kind of, I guess, it's growing a lot, and we don't have a lot of routes for bringing electricity in from outside the region. We've got the mountains to the east, and there's only a couple transmission routes. We've got a couple transmission routes that head south. So we'll be looking to be building transmission, and then at the local level, making sure that our system is going to be able to also not just take the growth of our population, but the growth of electrification in buildings, in transportation. And that sort of brings us to the reason I reached out. We're definitely trying to talk with our jurisdictions about what that transition looks like at the local level. More EVs plugging into the system, more electric buildings. That's going to be leading to the necessity of more transformers, updated transformers, making sure that the wires are all being able to carry the extra capacity. And then also local generation, so solar panels from residential to industrial scales. What is battery storage going to look like? You noticed in the previous answers that I sent over that there's a fair bit of, I guess, capacity sort of envisioned in reducing our usage. And so how are we going to do that? So a fair bit involved with CETA there. The Climate Commitment Act is newer than CETA. We're still trying to figure that out, but that is the state's cap and invest program. So limiting greenhouse gas emissions for several major, I guess, organizations, not just utilities in the state. But so that's certainly going to be affecting us on the natural gas side, affecting rates for our customers and how we're providing that service. So making sure that we can continue to provide reliable and affordable natural gas service as we're sort of in this transition is going to be another push to, I guess, balance that out with the electric side capacity. And then Growth Management Act, SEPA, Shoreline, just threw that in, show that we're kind of dealing with all the same sort of regulations that a lot of the cities are as well. This is just a quick overview of the programs that PSC has put together over the last several years. This is an ongoing effort by PSC to sort of figure out how we're going to make this transition, address climate change. And so these are programs that are available for our customers. That includes cities, private residences, commercial, industrial. But so green power, solar choice, and carbon balance are all ways to basically go above and beyond the basic rate set by the state and say, it's important to me that I am using, in the case of green power, renewable energy only, or solar choice, solar energy. And you just pay the cost at whatever level that's available in the market. Community solar and renewable natural gas. Similar idea, community solar is a local solar source, but you can buy into local solar projects and basically cover your individual usage on your meter. Renewable natural gas, same idea. We've got an agreement with a plant down, I just blanked on the county, but down southern Washington, they're burning fuel like waste and burning renewable natural gas. So they're collecting methane off of a waste system. And so you can be using non-fossil fuel-based natural gas for your usage. And then customer connected solar is just any customers who are putting solar panels up and connecting into the system. So these are all kind of where PSC is at now. These will certainly be evolving over time as we sort of figure out what the transition is going to be looking like. New technology comes in, et cetera. So that was a lot about PSC at large. This is an update to the information I had sent previously on our planned usage. And these slides, Debbie's got these so she can share them with you. This is new as of April. The previous graph I had sent you was part of the, or I guess table, was part of the integrated resource plan that we submitted in one. This was the first time we have done this. It's an electric progress report. And so it's part of the CETA requirements in terms of moving forward on renewable energy. And so it kind of, I guess the IRP is taking a broad industry look at what's available for us. We're running models, just kind of trying to break down what's our best path forward. This is getting a little bit more specific into like, what does PSC have on hand? Like what pilots might we be running in the near future? And so it tweaks the numbers a little bit, kind of breaks it down in a different manner, but I wanted to share it since it's brand new since we had talked last. And then we can kind of use it to speak to one of the follow-up questions y'all had sent regarding, I think both distributed energy resources and demand side response. Because I think there's some pretty good questions there. There are questions that PSC is also working through. But so let's see here. I guess I can do a quick rundown through the top half of this, which is maybe some of the newer items. But so demand side resources, we're looking at basically reducing demand instead of building new infrastructure to serve that demand. The first one is something that's been around for a long time. PSC's got decades of work trying to reduce the energy usage of our customers. That can be through, and mostly that's through energy efficiency measures. We've got programs that work with our residential customers, commercial, industrial. They range kind of from brand new construction, how can we get you to go above and beyond the current efficiency codes, to maybe you're just doing some remodels, or maybe an industrial customer has sort of their setup for heating, but they haven't updated like the computer running their system for the last 5-10 years. So can we tweak that and get more energy efficiency? So several programs in energy conservation. And then demand response is very new, kind of something we've not done a whole lot of with PSE. We've kind of seen it more down in California. This is where we are either asking customers to reduce their energy usage at like peak times, or we are setting up an agreement where there's automatic reduction of energy use at those peak times. And so in the text over, excuse me, on the right, those 4 bullets at the bottom are kind of how we are envisioning those programs kind of just being categorized. And so the top one, behavioral demand response, like how do we adjust people's choices when they're using electricity? When are they running their dryers or plugging in their electric vehicles? And can we maybe incentivize them to do it at a different time? That one is more based on actions that the customer can take. The next 2, commercial and industrial curtailment, is basically the agreement we have with them in terms of their rate. They might get a slightly cheaper rate, but if usage like in peak demand times, they're the first to lose service, and they don't get it until it comes back. So it's kind of setting up a curtailment agreement. Direct load control is more of an automated system where PSE can notify a system associated with a meter, and maybe it changes the energy usage. So we have PSE is mostly peaking in winter right now for heating. We're definitely seeing a sort of a second peak growing in summer for cooling energy loads, but a lot of our peak load is still in the winter. And so maybe a warehouse could bump their like initial heat up in the morning earlier so that it's not happening at peak time. And so that can be controlled automatically. And then the 4th one is sort of playing with incentives and disincentives. Like how do we, can we adjust pricing for like peak times and help people kind of make their choice of like when we're going to be, when they're going to be using electricity. And so that's kind of an introduction to where we're at. PSE's planning some pilots at this point to sort of explore how these work and what might be a best option for us and our customers. I can't really go into details at this point. I don't really even know all that much, but PSE as a company can't share that at this point, just because we have to make sure we're being, what is it? It's before we notice to like put those programs out for contractors to sort of run those programs for us. But, the distributed energy resources is sort of a broad catch-all term for what I mentioned earlier of different ranges of solar connections and storage. I was happy to see in your climate element, you kind of already are broaching the subject of how can we support new technology. That's something we're really struggling with ourselves, and also trying to make sure we're communicating with folks. I think there's some interesting ideas. King County has like solar easements to protect solar panel systems. But just how are you making sure that those solar panels are a worthwhile investment in the city of Kenmore? for your private, like single family homeowner and for businesses. PSC is currently working on a project or a program to lease properties from private residents to put in solar panels and batteries. And so it's kind of a win-win for everybody because the property owner gets a little bit of income. We get space where it's kind of hard to find air space to put solar panels into like neighborhoods that are already built out. But so that's just kind of one example of how are we going to fit these systems into neighborhoods that are already built out. And then the big question for us is battery storage, which can range from small, like individual batteries on a small parcel to larger, like grid supporting levels. We've tried to put some in as tests in a few areas. We were trying to do one outside of Redmond in unincorporated King County a couple years ago. Just ran into so many roadblocks. We weren't able to do it. It was sort of a great area. There was a lot of rooftop solar. If we could get that battery there to sort of flatten out the like high peak generation of a solar panel in the middle of the day and save that for later times, that sort of helps with the grid stability and keeping costs down, and is a great renewable source. But codes don't really address batteries at this point. And so we ended up moving up to like somewhere, I think in Whatcom County, and they kind of made it work, but they also didn't have the codes, but they were willing to work with us. So I think if we can find ways to figure out what's going to work for these batteries, how we fit them into city codes, how they're going to sort of fit amongst our existing buildings, it's something we'd really like to work with cities on. That was a lot of me talking, so I appreciate that. I can kind of pause here if there are any questions on any of that.
Commissioner Vanderveen.
Yes, I'm interested in hearing a little bit more description of the roadblocks, particularly related to batteries, and what sort of code changes do you think would be required? Do we know what they are yet? Is that under development? Any partnerships in mind with cities on how to develop those, to work with on developing those?
Am I too quiet? Sorry for that. Yeah, so we are working on trying to put together basically an idea of model code, because there's certainly the need for that has been identified. It's sort of been a challenge. We have an ongoing project where we basically every time we think we've got it, the technology changes, and we kind of have to go back and start over. But the big part of batteries is like setbacks, because code doesn't even mention batteries in most situations. And so where does it apply? Where doesn't it? Which zones accept it, which don't? But then what are the setbacks going to be? What are some of the, I guess, associated with setbacks? There's sort of like a fencing or wall issue, because there is some degree of noise associated with like the operation of batteries, and that's like how are we blocking that? But we're working with limited space, so like how much of the space are we going to lose trying to like dampen the sound and make sure we're set back enough from adjacent buildings? And certainly the other large challenge, there's I guess some potential for fires with a lot of electrical wires running around. So trying to define what that risk is in practice, and then the appropriate steps to address that risk is something we've spent some time working with some of the local fire departments who are sort of tasked at, I guess, managing that risk with us. And I think the big concern is it's new and there's things to be developed, but we don't want the initial response to be like, this is new and it's not something we're interested in doing, because it's an important part of what the electric grid is going to look like in the future. And so we're really hoping to have those conversations and figure out what challenges are we missing, what might a city be looking for in this situation. But certainly the zoning where they allowed the setbacks that are going to be required, and then the conversation around how we're going to be addressing the risks and which risks are we willing to take. Because I think there was one situation in Arizona that went poorly, and now it's sort of put a bad name to the whole technology, and that's not what we want. Just because one instance went poorly doesn't mean they all have to.
Patrick, I appreciate you being here, and I have a bunch of questions, which I think some of these my questions have been answered here. One of the biggest criticisms that PSC has had for some time is that the company as a whole is not moving quickly enough toward clean energy. Could you maybe comment on that or alleviate some of the concerns that I think the community may have compared to your competition, perhaps? And so I'd be interested in kind of getting your thoughts on whether or not PSC is working fast enough for this end goal.
Yeah, I think the driving factor, and a lot of the conversation I have with various cities that we work with, we are PSC as a company, we're aligned with state regulations in terms of CETA and the CCA and those thresholds. We're working with our cities on their, I guess, efforts. I got to work with Richard and Sammy on the climate action plan. There's great info and steps forward there. What I find myself often bringing to the conversation is that there are a lot of costs associated with this. We are working to change decades of infrastructure in a very short amount of time. And it's very important to protect the rates of our customers. I think when I'm looking at my energy usage and what I can do at my house, I have things available to me that single mom across the street may not have, or that the retired individuals a couple houses down on a fixed income. How do we adjudicate who pays for what here? And so I guess trying to make sure that we're paying attention to the costs of these changes and how that's going to work is a big part that we'd like to make sure is included in the conversation. And then the second one being reliability. We're looking at a lot of growth with population, a lot of growth with capacity, both with electrified buildings, electrified transportation. And there are people who depend on having electricity for their livelihood or their life. Reliability is the driving concern for PSE. We need to make sure we keep people's electricity on. And so I 100% feel the need to make these changes that we're trying to figure out. But I think what maybe gets lost is how difficult that is and how expensive that is, and how fast can we truly take that forward without sacrificing cost and reliability.
Just on that note, is there anything being done to provide financial assistance for lower to moderate income households. Is there any kind of, does PSC hopefully takes that into consideration, and hopefully something is being done to help those that may not be able to afford the cost of what PSC charges? I mean, I get my bill every single month, and it's increases each month. So what is PSC done to help those in need, those who may not be able to afford these high costs?
Yeah, I was just checking my notes here, so I'm not completely redundant, because we had touched on low-income assistance. And so that information was specific to just bills in general. And so we do have a system in place for customers who need assistance with their bills. I mentioned earlier the UTC has, for the last couple years, asked us to put an extra emphasis on equity. And so we set up an equity advisory group, kind of looking at how a lot of these clean energy programs may be impacting those neighborhoods, making sure that we're not disproportionately affecting them, but also how can we run our pilot programs to make sure that we're involving them, so that we're not just taking one subset of our customers and saying, oh yeah, this pilot works really well for them, but maybe those were the folks who had the time and the resources to engage with us. And so we do have some programs to help financially. That's sort of being tweaked and expanding as we find other opportunities, or maybe ways in the renewable energy programs I mentioned earlier. How can we tweak those so that they're also serving those customers? But it's something we're doing and looking to improve on.
Commissioner Banzinski.
So I know this is complex, and I appreciate the concern over reliability and rates. And also, and I very strongly believe that those communities that have been historically overburdened should not bear the brunt of the cost of this transition, should not be burdened by that. But to focus simply on making sure that the rates stay low and that everybody has electricity, it seems very short-sighted to me when we are in an existential crisis. I mean, I really fear for the future of my 10-year-old. I feel like we have to be thinking about the longer game. And can you speak a little bit to that? I mean, you've spoken to kind of the short-term game, like how are we going to short-term get through this transition, but what's PSE's longer-term game?
So are you thinking about, I guess, programs or facilities?
Yes, and I guess what are PSC's concerns, and what are you doing to address not just like how challenging it is to get through this, but to actually get through it so that we have an inhabitable planet in 20, 30, 40, 50, 100 years like that? I am very sensitive to the fact that we don't want to, again, overburden people with higher rates, but somebody's going to have to pay for this. Like, that's just the fact of the matter. These transitions do cost money. I would like to hear, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, I guess, the crisis that we're in.
Before I speak to some more of what's on this slide, I've got a 3 and a 5-year-old and feel very similar to how you feel. I think a lot of folks kind of have that concern. I'm on the Linwood Planning Commission and ask very similar questions to what I'm getting here. And so when I talk about reliability and cost, it is not to say that they are more important, but to say that carbon emissions and I guess the electric transition and equity, we have several priorities that we have to balance. And I think all of them are things that we can't drop. And so when a city is working on a climate action plan or a climate element, we certainly understand why that's happening. And we aren't trying to say that that effort is wrong. We're just trying to make sure that the other priorities are also being included. And so I wanted to clarify that because it's certainly not just about reliability and cost, but how do we have multiple priorities and hold all of those to the same threshold or same standard? To speak to, I guess, what PSC is doing, we're having just massive investments in what you're seeing on this table in terms of the full spectrum of renewable energy options. Some of them are pretty tried and true at this point in time. That wasn't necessarily the case 20 years ago. Maybe it was harder to make the case 10 years ago. Some of them are great now. Some of them will probably be great in 10 years. PSC is looking at all of them. And so wind and solar kind of known entities with pros and cons, but we're trying to figure out how to address those cons and take full advantage of the pros. We're working to figure out how we can bring in renewable hydrogen. That could pay off. It's also got pros and cons. But when we're looking at reliability, we struggle to see where we're going to be able to completely remove natural gas in the near future. And so we're going to have a replacement for that. We call that dispatchable, a dispatchable resource, but where wind and solar, we sort of get it when we get it. We need something that we can pretty much push a button and say, now we have energy. And so what are our options as we get rid of coal and as we shrink natural gas? What's going to replace that? And so the renewable hydrogen's one. We don't have any current plans for nuclear. There's a lot of sort of research going into these smaller modular nuclear reactors. It's not here yet, but it's exciting, like it may at some point. And so sort of at this large picture that you were asking about, we're leaving no stone unturned. How do we get the capacity that we need and meet the CETA requirements? And if I just can tie it back into the comp plan here, we're trying to have a proactive conversation with our cities, like about the needs that we're going to be running into. How do we take the existing grid that's outside and turn that into something that will serve our customers?
Thank you. That's very thoughtful. And I like to hear that you have kids too. Makes a difference to how you think about the world.
It certainly does.
So I know that PSC has continued to invest in natural gas infrastructure. There's the Tacoma LNG facility. That's a huge, huge investment in a fossil fuel derived energy source. And I know that there have been other projects like that. And can you speak a little bit to that? Why are these big projects still being built instead of focusing more on renewable energy infrastructure?
So I can speak a little bit to it. That's as being focused sort of in the municipal realm, that's maybe a step over. So I don't have a lot, but I think I would just point to the comments I made on making sure that we are providing the best service we are capable of providing. And then I think that was, you pointed recent, but that was completed recently. It was started, the process quite a long time ago. And there was a point where the state was very much in support of the benefits that natural gas had. And so with those sort of projects, we find ourselves sort of stuck in the middle of this transition and trying to make hard decisions about the reliability for our customers and sort of how we make the first steps in the transition. So,
Patrick, is removing all fossil fuels out of PSC's electric and gas utilities part of PSC's short-term or long-term plan? Is that something that you could maybe speak to or want to even speak to? Is that something that that PSC has a plan to do in the near future, removing all fossil fuels?
So the CETA requirements have that set at a 2045 timeline. So I don't know if that's near term, short term, but like that's certainly the direction we're moving. We're working to meet all the requirements of CETA. Yeah, I think that's a simple answer. So does that answer your question?
That's what I wanted, a simple answer, but thank you for that. Yeah. One more question here. Can you discuss any outreach programs that PSC has implemented or anywhere that I can find, maybe online, for disadvantaged communities? Any educational programs, any financial help programs, which we earlier discussed? Are there any outreach programs that you can discuss or I can read about that PSC has implemented thus far? Specifically towards disadvantaged communities.
I need to clarify. Are you looking for information on our bill assistance that we talked about earlier? Or are you thinking larger?
It's larger, on a broad scope, any programs that PSC has?
So I guess I mentioned our equity advisory group. Their agendas and meetings are all public on our website. Yeah, I can follow up with.
Are those meetings that happen that are live meetings on? Is that what you're referring to with these advisory groups? Or
I do believe that they are streamed to be. I don't know. I don't want to misspeak. I've looked at it a little bit. I think that there is the potential for watching when they stream. I don't know if that's necessarily still the case. It's sort of a new process, but I can certainly follow up with some links to that program and share what's available. It's generally meant to be something that is out there and engaging a full range of stakeholders. So I'll send that. And then my second thought, we don't have necessarily a one-stop shop for where our outreach to disadvantaged groups are. It's sort of something that's been pushed across all the groups at PSC. And so like our transportation electrification folks have a full suite of programs they're working on, and that's going to include a program sort of looking at outreach to those groups. Similarly, community solar, distributed energy resource, like solar connected programs also are working to include those, but I don't have a spot that I could point you to that would necessarily have all of those different programs.
Are there any further questions, comments? Commissioner Benzinski?
So I know that utilities have their customers as sort of captive, we're captive audiences because we don't, they're like, it's not like a phone, for example, there's no competition, right? And so it feels a little bit like I'm kind of howling into a void when I'm expressing concerns and frustrations about how the utility that I am beholden to is acting as an actor in the world. But that said, I do know a little bit about how some of the other utilities in areas surrounding ours work, Seattle City Light, the Snohomish PUD, for example. And I know that they have been able to provide energy from sources other than coal, and they have been doing it for years. And PSE is still relying heavily on coal to provide their energy. And so I'm just wondering, I know it takes money and time and resources to transition, but it just feels like it's taking a long time, and that and it's possible, as evidenced by the fact that other utilities have transitioned away from those energy sources. So I'm just curious, like, what's the holdup other than it just takes time and resources? If other utilities have already done it, why hasn't PSE?
I would point out maybe a couple differences between us and those examples first. The way that each of those utilities sort of grew over the last century was different. And so they were at the, like, from the beginning, basically fed by hydro, and that was the route that they took. And so they benefit from that now. PSE does have some of that, but like we're dealing with the ramifications of decisions made several decades ago. I'd also say that PSE serves 10 counties. Seattle City Light and Snowput are much smaller. And so getting the breadth of that capacity is, I might say, a little different. I will say, good news, we will be coal-free by 2025. We are pretty much, we got rid of the plant down in Chehalis, and we now have just one coal generating facility out in Montana. We've been working to divest ourselves from that. I don't know, it's been a little bit of drama for folks following that in terms of the other stakeholders, but it's something we're working on. And I guess there are lawsuits involved, and we would love to be done with it, but it's something that we will meet our CETA deadline for.
Yeah, I will just follow up by saying I also have misgivings about hydro, quite honestly, because sometimes it is not salmon safe. Oftentimes it is not salmon safe, and that is a huge, it's a huge challenge and issue that we have in front of us. And so Seattle City Light and Snohomish PUD aren't necessarily doing things in the most sustainable manner. So I just wanted to bookmark that. And then maybe I'll try to make this be my last question, but can you talk about PSC's relationship with the area's tribes, and how PSC interacts with them, how much influence PSC is able to take in from those voices, those tribes being the first and best caretakers of our watersheds and our land. Yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So I maybe to start a step back, didn't necessarily provide any introduction to myself. But so my role at PSC is largely coordinating with municipalities on the full range of topics that any question basically that a municipality might have at PSC. That sort of means that some of the like local water districts that aren't technically a municipality but don't have someone at PSC work with us. And so I will say in the past, that was sort of how we managed the relationship with the local tribes in our service territory. That has shifted. We now have a dedicated team specific to working with the tribes. So in the same way that I am a dedicated resource to communicating with cities, we have folks who are dedicated to working with the tribes, enhancing that relationship, making sure communication is going both ways. I have had, I will say, the benefit of trainings over the last 2.5 years to better understand where tribes are coming from, how PSC sort of crosses paths with them, and the correct way to be sort of contextualizing them in terms of the slew of regulators that I provided. Like, they're federally recognized, they have a lot of say. And so that was something that was PSC wide, that training. And so PSC's made several large steps to make sure that we are not only having these conversations, but that we are really meeting them at their place and supporting that relationship. And I mean, I'll say similarly to, we have 119 cities that we work with and probably 119 different relationships. It's the same thing with, I want to say the 40 tribes that we are working with, but it's something that we are constantly trying to improve, and we've dedicated more resources to that to improve it.
How's PSC's relationship with Puyallup tribe?
I don't know. Yeah. I smile because I have a coworker who may have called in. She's working with all of the comp plans, and she used to cover Pierce, so Pierce County. But I do not know specifics about the Puyallup tribe.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions, comments? So you know what this is it's the evening to stump Patrick with questions. So I hope we've done a pretty good job of that. Now, when you talk about batteries, I know you're talking about larger batteries with regard to the problems you had on the east side, as far as placing one and all those issues, correct? That's what we're talking. That's what you were talking about.
I would clarify that we are evaluating the full range of like maybe a 5 megawatt battery that would maybe be able to sit discreetly in the corner of a lot versus I think the biggest local example was down in Renton, where it was a full like industrial warehouse that was, I forget the scale, but like a warehouse of batteries. And it was new and scary, and they put a full moratorium on, and that's a big gap for like how we're addressing a key part of our transition. And so we are thinking about that full range of that full spectrum when we are looking at storage options.
So with regard to the smaller options, when relatives in California, and of course they have solar panels, and then they have the garage batteries that sit on the side of the garage, and And they're full most of the time, but they address your peak time issues, is my understanding. That's where the utility down there saves quite a bit of money, and it's very economical, environmentally good. But the problem up here in the Northwest is that we normally don't have 4 days in a row of sun. So at least that's what I think. So I'm wondering what you think. Am I on the same drift as far as why the garage batteries with solar panels is not going to be as efficient or take off here in the Northwest? Or
I have two thoughts there. One, I hesitate to prognosticate too much on the garage scale. That's much more of a personal finances sort of decision. Yeah, and I think there's even part of that puzzle is the cost of energy from your utility, and some of the energy prices in California maybe make the equation work out a little bit better for investing in a battery in your garage. We may not be there at this point, but yeah, I don't know how that will work out in the future. If we think about dynamic pricing and critical peak pricing, maybe if you have the resources to invest in a battery in your garage, you can say, okay, I'll flip my battery on when the peak prices are going to cost me extra. And
which helps save the environment when that happens, though, because you don't have to produce as much electricity that creates an environmental issue, correct?
yeah, I think we will, I was going to say, we'll support anything that kind of drops that peak load, because if you think about, we have to serve the highest peak load all year, and we have to have the infrastructure built out all year long to just serve that 1 day of peak load. And so anything we can do to drop peak load is beneficial. Yeah, I think the second thought I had on this, especially once we get out of the garage and we're looking at storage systems that are attached to the grid, we can, I guess, go back and forth on how much solar generation we're going to be getting in January. Like we have 2 really great months of solar generation, but we still get some in January, and so there's some benefit there. But also, especially with the battery energy storage systems, the best industrial scale ones, if we're bringing in energy on the transmission systems from renewable sources outside of Western Washington, we can purchase that energy at low rates when nobody really needs it, but the sun is shining and somebody's got to use it. And then when those go into the batteries, and then we save that for those peak times when prices start skyrocketing because everybody's trying to get energy. And so it's not necessarily just like, I've got this solar panel here and I'm gonna fill my battery all the time with solar. When we're looking at grid scale systems, we can be thinking like, okay, it's sunny over on the other side of the mountains and it's dirt cheap to get energy. Let's fill these batteries right now, and then we've got it for when we need it later.
Well, the same argument could be used for wind.
Exactly.
Generation, because I'm familiar with Southern California, where they have spots where they can pick up good winds from the Santa Ana winds, and they have great generation, and they have built the batteries, but they still can't meet the peak performance from 4 o'clock to 8 o'clock. They have to have, they've retained their natural gas plants just to cover that short period of time is what I understand, which is unfortunate, but it's the way it goes, at least for now.
Yeah, and I'll hit on this again because this was the big reason that I reached out, but thinking about how these batteries, how these solar gotta stop saying solar systems, but solar panel systems are going to fit into the city of Kenmore, and how you can make that a viable investment for PSE, for your retail and industrial customers, for your residential customers, is a big deal.
That's all I have. If there's any further comments, and is there anything in closing you would like to say?
Well, so I did have one last slide here for you. And so this was just to the second question on hydro. It certainly has its pros and cons, like most generating or most generation resources. But I just wanted to share this in terms of the facilities we have up at Baker that was relicensed through FERC in 2008. And this is a list of all the stakeholders who were involved in the relicensing process. There was a settlement agreement that all of these folks signed. It drove a lot of the mitigation that PSE is doing, both in terms of fish, but also all of the associated river ecosystem, like reporting. And I think there's elk specific programs. There's a couple plant specific programs. There's noxious weed management programs. And so I guess there was questions around the benefits of the facilities we have up there, and recognizing that there are trade-offs. We have a lot of folks that we continually are engaging with to make sure we're making the best decisions we can. There's quarterly meetings with representatives from these groups to make sure that the settlement agreement is being fulfilled. If one of the plans isn't working, sort of this adaptive management, like what tweaks need to be made. And so I want to, I guess, highlight the work that's being put into supporting the system up there, the ecosystems there, and all of the relationships for the different groups of people that are involved, to make it something that's worthwhile. The facilities associated with addressing the salmon runs there are truly like cutting edge. They are something that groups across the United States and around the world come and visit. And so I know that there was some concerns raised about what's going on there, and I don't want to diminish those concerns, but I wanted to just share that we have a lot of work going into to try and make sure that we're not missing anything there. And so that's a lot of folks, but I just, you can have access to that. And the hydro settlement agreement is something you can find on our website as well. And I'll take any questions there, or I can wrap up.
I think we're good. So,
And I'll just
thank
say
you
thank
for
you.
all your time, Patrick.
I appreciate you having me, and Debbie's got my email, so I'm always available if there are other questions. And I will follow up, Commissioner Saad, about the Equity Advisory Group.
All right. I was going to mention back to the topic of the climate action element. I believe there's still a little controversy with regard to the 50% and the reduce and eliminate words. And so I was wondering if commissioners would think that on this. I would go with the draft that's got the red and blue highlights, and then just or underlines, I should say, and just if we could highlight like in yellow the times where we have, you know, reduced by 50% and the terms reduce and eliminate. Just highlight those in yellow so that the commissioners could look through the document quickly and see what items they would like to, because when you highlight the reduce and eliminate, that will automatically bring down the date that we're looking at. So if that makes sense to you?
No. So you're asking for in the, I wish Richard and Nina were here, but so you're asking in the document which has the currently the edits shown in blue and red.
Right,
On
on
that document, you want to highlight where the words reduce and eliminate pop up.
correct. And we're talking about specifically the 2050, the 2030s, the 2040s.
I think they addressed that, but again.
Well, I'm not talking about PSC, I'm talking
No,
about.
I know,
Oh,
I
okay.
understand, but I think this question came up at the last meeting about dates and what they should be, and I thought that was addressed in this document. But if it's not, then.
Well, it is addressed, but I'm not certain that all of the members, all the commissioners are settled on a final approach to that. But if I'm wrong, speak up, folks.
I support that, Dwight.
Yeah, we couldn't hear you. You have to speak up.
I support you, Dwight. Yes.
Okay.
So I will let Richard and Nina know that at the next meeting, you want reduce and eliminate highlighted in yellow as it appears in the document.
Right. And we'll run through that to make sure the policy is as we would like it to be.
Okay.
And that all has to go with, well, those two words plus when. So by identifying those two words, that'll lead us to the when without having to highlight too much.
Okay. Is there a, just so I'm clear, is there a specific example that I can kind of just look at? So like goal 8, for example, says eliminate or reduce climate change impacts on the community. Is that where you were looking to have reduce and eliminate highlighted? Is that an example?
Yeah, that would be one example. And then
Okay.
there's some where it says eliminate by 2050, reduce by 2050. Sometimes it's just one or the other word. And
Okay, so it's, okay.
you know, we've heard testimony tonight and we've discussed this quite a bit. So I think we need to settle clearly of where the Planning Commission wants to be on that. Won't take us long. We
No,
promised it.
I just wanted to make sure that I understood the context. Okay.
And the other comment is that when we present this to the city council, my viewpoint is I would like to specifically address that issue and express to them where the consensus of the commission is and why we have specifically looked at those words in the time. And I'll have the little, or one of us will have the words and music to go with that so that they can make the next decision.
I know you were concerned about the 2050 date, and I think the approach there was to say or sooner. if feasible, or something, or words like that, rather than putting in a specific date. But I guess that's what you will kind of take a look at.
Right, we're just gonna double check that because and in fact, that wording came from our prior discussion, and then
Right.
we've already been hit up again during public comments and as well as the hearing and listening to PSC. It's a similar situation, so I think it's reasonable to just look that over once and make sure we're all settled. So when we go to the council, we can speak to that more clearly,
Okay.
because they're definitely going to hear about it in their public comments, I would think. This is a little topic.
Okay, well, so the purpose of having Patrick tonight was just to give you some context. Obviously, this is only one component of the element and it's not all about PSC. But it was important for you to hear that. So the next step then would be, the last time you looked at this, you were looking at the public facilities element. We had some changes there. You've already seen those with the goals, objectives and policies. There are some additional changes that need to be updated on that. So that's a little bit further ahead. I can bring that back along with hopefully a draft of an updated background version with goals, objectives and policies. So my hope would be to do that for the second meeting in July. And why do I say that? Is because the first meeting in July is on July 4th.
We have to
So my
cancel.
question to the Planning Commission, I shouldn't assume, I'm assuming you would prefer to cancel that meeting rather than reschedule it.
Is there a motion to that effect?
I move to cancel the July 4th meeting.
And seconded that we cancel the July 4th meeting regardless of the fireworks. Is there any objection? Hearing none, it's so ordered.
Right.
So could we just, when, or if we pass this out in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
when would be on the climate action element? When would we present that to the city council?
In the fall.
In the fall. So in fact, this goes back where you said you're going to put several elements together when we go
Right.
forward to the council. Is that correct?
Yes, because you've already done the transportation element. The climate action element will be next. And then the public facilities element and utilities element you need to have a public hearing on those. So being as that's going to be delayed till July, that might have to be a hearing in August on those. And then after that, then we'll be starting probably getting some background information on the economic development element. We might not have time to put that on this year's docket. So we can only do what we can do. We have to have all elements approved by next year. The deadline is December 2024.
Okay, so those 4 elements, that's the first package.
Yeah.
We're looking at a presentation to the council late August or in September then.
I would say it's probably going to be late September, early October before you present to the council.
I just would like everyone to have a clear understanding of where, the group and when that's going to hit. That's great.
Right, because we also have to make sure that we've got the SEPA analysis done, the notice to commerce, those sort of procedural things all need to be done and taken care of before council takes any action. So as you know how this works, maybe just for Commissioner Codry's benefit here, is after you've made a recommendation and you present that to council, council then decides then what to do. If they take the Planning Commission recommendation as is, or just make minor tweaks to it, non-substantive, they can then adopt an ordinance. If they want to make substantive changes to the Planning Commission's recommendation, they will then have to hold another public hearing before the council because it's changed. before they could then adopt the ordinance. So all this needs to happen before the end of the year. You can only amend the comprehensive plan once a year. So all the work that the Planning Commission has done this year, you've, like I said, the transportation element you've done, you're close on the climate action element. Why aren't we taking this to the council now? We're trying to bring everything forward together, because it will then all be adopted as one ordinance by the council before the end of the year.
So if we all meditate together, will you, would it help you in hiring Lori's replacement?
Well, I have actually excellent news on that
Excellent
matter.
news. Okay.
Yes.
She's smiling.
I'm smiling. We've hired a new principal planner who will be starting on June 26th.
Hey.
His name is Todd Hall. He has 20 years of planning experience. He's currently working at the North Shore School District in the Capital Facilities Program. So I am very much looking forward to having Todd on board, and he will, I guess you'll meet him in July.
Well, we won't have to meditate over that one.
No, you don't.
But I know this has been really high on your plates that you've got to deal with. And I personally am very happy for you that you've found your person.
I'm very happy. So we will continue to move forward with the comprehensive plan. There's still a lot of work to do on that. There's also a slew of state legislation that passed this year that will require city action. For example, on the missing middle housing, on accessory dwelling units, just to name two. The city will have to comply with that state legislation by June of 2025. So when and how that's done to be determined, but we will have to make some change.
So I thought most of that was for cities larger than ours. But there are
Everybody
few.
has to do something.
Okay, all right, something.
So for cities under 25,000 for missing middle, you have to allow 2 dwelling units in all residential zones. The city is just under that 25,000 threshold. Once you pass that, you are then in the next tier, which is cities between 25,000 and 75,000. So in addition to those 2 units per lot, you would have to allow 4 units per lot within a quarter mile of transit.
But Debbie, how does lot size play into that? Is that the discussion for?
I don't think minimum lot size is regulated that way.
So you could put 2 units on a postage size lot.
Possibly. We're getting into the weeds, which
Yes,
I'm
yes.
not prepared to do tonight.
No, we have to do.
No.
There is a lot, as you know, when you write, when state law is written, the then question then is, what do you mean by that? So there are a lot of questions currently being generated to the Department of Commerce about what does this mean? How do you interpret it? They're also working on a model ordinance. So I know there's, depends on who you ask, whether they want rules adopted sooner rather than later. You know, Commerce is going to be coming out with some guidance on implementation. They've been doing a lot of work also on missing middle housing with Opticos. So they're getting a lot of information put together that will assist cities in putting these regulations in place, but that takes time. So that's why when this legislation was passed, it said cities had 6 months past the date of their comp plan update to get those in effect. So the date that we have to do something is by June of 2025.
This is the sausage making that behind all legislation.
If we thought getting the comprehensive plan was done would be, we could all take a little, lap around the track there. Well, I
Well, you
don't thi-
can, but as you know, the comprehensive plan, we try and update elements on a rotating basis so that it's usually every 5 years or so, each element gets a refresh so that when we get to the state mandated 10-year update, we're not kind of doing everything all at once. There's pros and cons to that, but that's how we're currently rolling on it.
Is there anything good for anything for the good of the order? I don't even see anything from Commissioner Lutz as he's smiling over there and haven't heard a peep from you or a red hand or a gold hand. So are you alive over there?
I'm alive. I almost put it up a couple of times, but you know, the rest of the commission and I are on the same wavelength and everything, so.
That's good to hear. So it is 8:57 and the Planning Commission meeting is hereby adjourned.